You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas and HitThatLine.com. Now, here's your host, Mason Choate.
Welcome to the HawgBeat Hour. Mason Choate, Andrew Hutchinson, and Alex Trader with you from HawgBeat.com. Today, we are going to be talking about some Arkansas football, basketball, and baseball. Football, Treylon Burks drafted. We'll talk about the rest of the guys that got drafted and the undrafted free agents. We're going to talk some basketball recruiting, and then we'll talk baseball later on the episode. But let's start off with Treylon Burks, first-round draft pick, number 18 overall to the Tennessee Titans. I'd like to give my opinion on it, but Hutch, I'll let you go first because I lead it off and then I go into you. So go Hutch.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thing. It was one of the biggest prize storylines of the NFL draft just because A.J. Brown is gone. And they're basically bringing in Treylon Burks to be the guy there in Tennessee. And that's some pretty big shoes to fill. And I definitely I think Burks is capable of doing it, but it's unfortunate because I know a lot of kind of the reaction from Tennessee fans was like, well, this sucks. Like, we didn't want to lose A.J., and they don't even really look at Burks as to what he could do. So it a little bit unfortunate from that perspective, but I think it's a good fit. I think he's going to get an opportunity to be a big time contributor right away for a team that's been one of the better teams in their division for the last couple of years. So I think it's a solid fit, and anxious to see what he can do as a rookie.
Yeah, so you look at Tennessee, and they are a run-first team. Derrick Henry, of course, the running back. And even last season when Henry was hurt for a little bit there, they were still run-first. They had a Deontay Foreman. They were just running the ball with him. They had a couple other guys, but you look at them now, and you said A.J. Brown's gone. They did get Robert Woods from the Rams in the offseason. He's coming off a torn ACL, I believe. So there's still another. Robert Woods is a really good NFL wide receiver. So it's not like Treylon Burks is all they have. But A.J. Brown, as you mentioned, very good wide receiver. So, yeah, they're going to be a little upset about that. But Ryan Tannehill, he's a good quarterback, getting older. They did pick up Malik Willis. So you look at it, maybe Burks and Willis can form a relationship. And if Willis eventually takes over, that could be a really good duo there in Tennessee. But I think that it's a good situation for him. He's probably, I mentioned Robert Woods, but Burks is probably going to be wide receiver one from day one. So that's going to be good. I'm excited to pick him up in my fantasy league. Alex, what do you think about Treylon Burks to the Titans?
Yeah, I think it's a good fit, like y'all said. Interestingly enough, the Burke's biggest draft comparison from Daniel Jeremiah was A.J. Brown. So you're not really going to have to switch up the style of offense you're running too much to get him involved. You've kind of already got the same situation in place. It's a matter of Burks going out there and performing. And I think, there's not really too much of a quarterback controversy to worry about right now. But Tannehill's recent comments about it not really being his job to mentor Malik Willis could cause some rift there. I think Burks is a good pickup for the Titans to kind of guide them through that and make sure that they have the weapons they need, or at least are starting to gather the weapons they need alongside Derrick Henry to continue on trying to build for that playoff push. They took a little step back this year after losing to the Bengals, but it's a good situation. You have a good coach in Mike Vrabel, and you have a franchise that's been, over the last couple of years, pretty consistently solid. There were probably some better situations Burks could have gone to, like Packers maybe with Aaron Rodgers, but nonetheless, I think you're walking into about as good of a situation as you can ask for, given that the draft is kind of a random, you're stuck wherever you end up situation.
Yeah, and also, the Titans, I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe they were the number one seed in the AFC in the playoffs last year. So he's going to a team that wins ball games, and I think that's good for Treylon Burks. Plus, for the Razorback fans out there, it's Tennessee, Nashville, pretty close to home comparatively. If he goes to Green Bay, that's not an easy drive to make. I was hoping Kansas City, of course, because of my Chiefs fandom, but also that's an easier drive. Go watch Treylon Burks, but Nashville's not bad. Nashville is a drive that's doable. So let's talk about the rest of the guys that got drafted. So it was John Ridgeway. He got drafted by the Cowboys. That's always interesting when a Razorback gets drafted by the Cowboys. And then Monterey Brown to the Jaguars. Just reactions on that, Hutch?
Well, I mean, you mentioned it's always interesting when that happens that a Razorback gets drafted by the Cowboys. The only other time it's happened was Felix Jones back in 2008, which is pretty wild to think about, just considering the connections with Jerry Jones and all that. And but I think it's solid. It sounds like the Cowboys people really like having him on board, and they like the fit. So I'm excited to see what he can do. I think he'll make the roster and be a guy that plays some this year. Monterey Brown going in the 7th round. I kind of figured he'd be a 7th round pick. I kind of thought he would be the third and final guy. And so it's Jacksonville though. So I guess having gone through the Chad Morris era will maybe prepare him for what he's going to experience in Jacksonville. But hopefully he can, find a way to make the team and contribute, whether it be special teams or whatever. So always good to see 3 guys get drafted. It's the most they've had in like the last 3 years. I think they only had 1 last year, 2 the year before that. So kind of an upward trajectory there, like you like to see.
And then as far as undrafted free agents, you saw Myron Cunningham go to the Texans, Grant Morgan joining Monterey Brown in Jacksonville with the Jaguars, and then Ty Clary signed with the Dolphins. And then a interesting Trey Wade got an invite from the Cardinals. And then also I saw this morning, I don't know if this is confirmed or not, but I saw that Davion Warren got an invite from the Titans to minicamp. Was there one more that I'm missing? But I think that's all, Hutch, right?
I think that's all of the Razorbacks that ended their career with Razorbacks. I know Cole Kelly, I think, got signed by Washington as an undrafted free agent. I kind of thought Cole Kelly was going to get drafted. I mean, people may not know this, but he went down to the FCS level at Southeastern Louisiana back in his home state, and he tore it up down there. I mean, he literally won the FCS Heisman Trophy essentially, and then finished runner up the next year, like this past season. So always good to see that happen. And of course, a guy you probably don't wish as much success on, Mike Woods. Did get drafted. I cannot remember who he got drafted by, but I know he got picked.
The Browns.
Well,
Yeah.
it's Mike Woods.
I mean, the Browns, it's a good situation for Mike Woods because as far as wide receiver goes, they got rid of Odell Beckham. Jarvis Landry hasn't really done much at all. And I don't think they've drafted anybody high. And then they've just got a bunch of guys they got Peoples-Jones. So I think that would be a good situation for Mike Woods. But as you mentioned, I don't know how many Razorback fans really care if it's a good situation for Mike Woods. But it's okay. So I think we can all agree that we think Treylon Burks, just best situation. He's going to be set up for success early on more than any Hog that got drafted or signed as an undrafted free agent.
Yeah, just because there is that hole that AJ Brown left, and I think, and also it's a winning team. Like I think we talked about it last week. I just didn't want him to go somewhere like Jacksonville or the New York Jets or just one of those garbage franchises that are just constantly losing. I wanted him to go to a team that he could win, be put in a position for success with a good quarterback. I mean, obviously we can debate the merits of the quarterback situation there, but it is a guy that is kind of the proven starter. So I think it's a good situation, and I think Ridgeway's situation is really good too. But I think that, I mean, there's no comparison being a first round pick, being asked to be the guy in Tennessee like Burks is.
Alex, you kind of looked into the receivers a lot. I feel like that was something that you kept up with throughout most of the year. Was where Treylon Burks was drafted, was that about what you expected as far as like all the guys that were on the board?
Yeah, hearing all the love for Drake London, I had Burks as my third receiver, but hearing the love for Drake London kind of made me think he was probably going to be either him or Olave would be 3 and 4, respectively, and they kind of shook out that way. He did go a little earlier than I thought he was going to because there was that run on receivers where you had. I know Wilson and Olave were back-to-back picks. London was 8, and Burks not too long thereafter. I was expecting him to be later in the first round, but I do think he went in that 4th spot, which is about what I was expecting. And he went a little earlier because of that AJ Brown trade. You didn't go into the draft looking at Tennessee as having a wide receiver first round need. And with Brown being gone, that did open that up. So I think as far as the draft progressed, that did shake out the way that I think most people expected.
Well, we keep saying with Brown being gone, but they traded Brown right before they took Burks. So I think the Titans had this idea of, if Burks is there or whoever was, but it ended up being Burks, we're going to trade Brown and replace him with somebody that we can pay less. We don't have to sign him to a max extension contract. And it's going to be serviceable as Brown. I'm not going to say that Treylon Burks is AJ Brown yet, but I think Treylon Burks has the potential to be a guy like AJ Brown in Tennessee. So, but okay, that's enough NFL draft. Let's talk about Arkansas getting a commitment from a defensive lineman. Hutch, it happened as you were driving to Baum-Walker Stadium. So no surprise there. Basically, anytime that you're busy, Arkansas gets a commitment. So tell us what you know about this guy.
Yeah, Terry Hampton. He's a transfer from Arkansas State, originally from El Dorado. So he's an in-state kid. I think he was like a low 3-star recruit coming out of high school. Chose to stay home, play for the Red Wolves. Was a pretty productive player there at Arkansas State. Had some good solid grades from Pro Football Focus, which whenever we're talking defensive tackles, which is the position he plays, it's hard to just look at just sheer stats and be like, okay, that guy was good or not. Sometimes Pro Football Focus kind of paints a better picture, and he graded out really solidly. Again, that's at the Sun Belt level, the completely different level from the SEC. He is only 6 foot tall, so that's somewhat of a concern. You know, you don't really see a ton of guys of that size have success as defensive tackles. There are some exceptions to the rule, but he's an in-state kid, and hey, I'm sure being at El Dorado, he would have loved to have come to Arkansas out of high school. Just didn't have that opportunity, and now I think he's going to be a super senior. He did miss, I think, half of last year with an injury, a season-ending injury. But up to that point, he was playing really well, played really well last year. And now, hey, he's getting a crack at playing for the Razorbacks. And it addresses a major position of need for Arkansas because, I mean, Sam Pittman himself said he wanted to get a couple of defensive linemen from the transfer portal. And I think he basically meant defensive tackles. They did add Landon Jackson and Jordan Dominic as defensive ends out of the portal already. They needed some defensive tackles. They went through spring ball with 4 defensive tackles, and that was, Isaiah Nichols, Armand Watts, good Lord, Torian Carter, Marcus Miller, and Cam Ball. They all were basically the defensive tackles throughout spring ball, and it really made it hard to go to 4-man fronts because you only had 4 defensive tackles. You couldn't do 3 full units. And they didn't really have anybody coming in as signees as defensive tackles. So you needed to go add some out of the portal. And it sounds like they have done that at least one with Terry Hampton from Arkansas State.
Yeah, so you kind of hit on it there. And I was going to ask Alex, I feel like this is something that we've talked about a lot, and I feel like most people have, but it's a position of need that Arkansas had to address, and they did. But you look at this guy, he's 6 foot, 293. That's what he's listed as. It provides you with depth, but do you see him being a real difference maker this next season?
I think anyone you can get there has to be given that opportunity. I mean, you can't consistently run a 3-man front and be able to stop the run the way that you're going to want to all the time. And that does make it difficult. It makes you a little bit one-dimensional on the defensive side of the ball. Recruiting the defensive tackle position is tough because, like Hutch said, you need these guys to be, massive dudes, and you don't necessarily always have time to wait on it. So I think the portal is helping that a lot, and it's putting Sam Pittman in a better position this season because you don't necessarily have those guys waiting in the wings. But I like Hutch said, you're bringing in a hometown kid who probably grew up wanting to be a Razorback, and now he has that opportunity. That does mean a little bit more to you if you're coming in and kind of living out a dream versus bringing in someone from out in California that maybe doesn't understand what it means to be a Razorback.
All right. Well, we got to hit a break, but after the break, we'll talk a little bit more football. And then we got some basketball recruiting we got to talk about. Hutch, you're going to talk with an Auburn expert to give some insight on the Tigers this weekend. And then we'll talk some Razorback baseball later on here on the HawgBeat Hour.
You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas and HitThatLine.com. Now, here's your host, Mason Choate.
All right, we are back here on the HawgBeat Hour. Don't forget, you can go subscribe to HawgBeat.com for the best coverage in Arkansas athletics. Go listen to things on the HawgBeat YouTube, watch the press conferences, listen to the HawgBeat Hour on the HawgBeat YouTube, the Diamond Hogs podcast. Hutch, you had a Know the Foe. It's the first time in a long time you've done the Know the Foe, and we'll have that on this podcast. And but go subscribe to HawgBeat.com. Got the student deal going still, $11.95 a year for students if you email Hutch at Andrew Hutchinson 413@gmail.com. It's a great deal, and it is worth it. I promise you. Okay. So a D-line recruit who's already committed to Georgia Tech is visiting Arkansas, Hutch. Is that correct?
That's correct. Morris Joseph is his name. He's been at Memphis the last few years. Really productive time at Memphis, but again, that's a different level than the SEC. Although the American Athletic Conference is probably a step above the Sun Belt compared to where Terry Hampton has come from. But he's apparently visiting. I heard this yesterday, or I guess on Wednesday, that he was already on campus visiting. This, I guess, isn't that uncommon. To me, it strikes me as weird that a guy would be a transfer committed elsewhere and still taking visits. But apparently that's what's happening. We know it happened with Jordan Dominic, Arkansas's defensive end commit, transfer from, ironically enough, Georgia Tech. I think he went and visited UCF despite being committed to Arkansas, and it didn't change anything. He's still coming to Arkansas. But yeah, I mean, this guy, again, Arkansas wants two of them. They've already got one in Hampton. They need to get one more, and this guy would seemingly fit the bill. He is listed at 275 pounds, so he's not quite as big. I think he's a little bit taller than Hampton. But you can't argue with the production that he had. He graded out like in the 70s on Pro Football Focus this year. I think he graded out like an 80 last year on Pro Football Focus. So it's a guy you would take if you can get him.
Okay. Alex, we're going to go to you now. So Arkansas made the top 5 for a bunch of very good recruits. And so I want to ask you to kind of go through these guys and maybe a confidence level in some of them. I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you to make it look like you're an expert in something you're not, but maybe if there's some guys that you have some confidence there, or maybe some inside information, don't share all of it, but say, well, I might feel a little bit good about this guy.
Yeah. As far as inside information goes, it's really just what I've been able to report over at HawgBeat. But as of right now, maybe the biggest name Arkansas was after on the offensive line, Connor Stroh, released his top 5 Friday, and it was Arkansas, Auburn, Florida, Texas, and Texas A&M. And it feels right now that the 2 Texas schools are leading. Arkansas was in early on his recruitment, but Texas was the first to offer. He's been to Arkansas a couple of times. I've gotten to talk to him a couple of times, but his parents both went to Texas A&M. His aunt and uncle both went to Texas A&M. And then he also has really developed a good relationship with Texas's offensive line coach. It really makes it difficult if you're Sam Pittman to get in there, but he is going to take his officials, and those are scheduled. Arkansas ended up with the I guess either third visit or third to last official visit behind Texas and Texas A&M. So there may be a little bit of catching up there to do, but if you have a head coach that you're looking to pull an offensive line recruit, I wouldn't feel too confident in many more people than Sam Pittman, just because he knows what offensive linemen want, and he's able to provide that. as well as Stroh. They landed in the top 8 for another top offensive tackle in Logan Reichert. Had a couple of running backs. These weren't necessarily just last week, but Cedric Baxter, Javen Simpkins, and Dante Dowdle all have mentioned Arkansas as potential suitors for them as they wind down their recruitment. A trio of 2023 running backs, very, very talented. And after bringing in a guy like Rashad Dubinion last class, you'd love to have any of those 3 guys coming in. And then there was a big time corner in Braxton Myers, who has some pretty big time offers. I would be surprised if he was an Arkansas lean or if he was going to come to Arkansas, but that's what the visits are for. And that's hopefully what Dominique Bowman's going to be able to portray to him, is that Arkansas is the place.
All right. Well, good stuff, Alex. Let's transition over to some basketball recruiting real quick. It is a slow season for basketball, but we have heard that there might be a recruit from Wichita State, potential transfer on campus. Hutch, what do you know about that? And I think the big question is, how is it going to work for Arkansas bringing in a new transfer? We know Jalen Williams got a combine invite, so you can hit on that as well. And just kind of, if Arkansas was to get another transfer, how would it work?
Yeah, so the transfer you're mentioning is his name is Ricky Council the fourth, I believe. He is from Wichita State, same school as Trey Wade came from. He's one of the top kind of available transfers in the portal right now. He was the American Athletic Conference 6th Man of the Year this past year. Averaged like 12 points, 5 rebounds. So a solid player overall for Wichita State. And again, it's the American Athletic Conference. It's a quality basketball conference, just as it is football. So they would definitely take him, I feel like, if he chose Arkansas. Arkansas is definitely one of the major players there. But if they do that, to me, that signals like, okay, for sure, Jalen Williams is gone, which you hate to say that because selfishly, just because he's such a good player, so fun to watch, and he would help Arkansas. But from a sheer numbers standpoint, that's how it is. I mean, as it stands right now, even without Council, you're at 14 scholarships if you include Jalen Williams. If he chose to come back, you'd have to get rid of somebody, whether that be Jackson Robinson, Kamani Johnson, Devo Davis, one of the 3 guys that are returning, or potentially one of the transfers you're bringing in, or one of these freshmen you're bringing in. If you bring in this transfer, that means, well, Jalen's gone, but you still have someone you got to get rid of. So does Jackson Robinson transfer? Does Kamani Johnson transfer? Devo Davis is a possibility, but to me, you really want to keep Devo Davis because he's kind of like the veteran on the team that's been here. He'll be a junior in his 3rd year. That's interesting. I mean, maybe it's one of the transfers, that happens from time to time. I mean, I think back to Desi Sills the previous offseason was going to go to Auburn, signed with Auburn, and then the next thing you know, he's at Arkansas State. So that happens. I don't hope it happens to any of them, but it is something to keep an eye on because it does sound. I'm hearing positive things regarding Council. That's not necessarily to say it's a done deal, but it does sound like it's a very strong possibility.
All right. And as long as we're on the topic of basketball, we kind of hit on it in the last segment, but Trey Wade to the Arizona Cardinals, what do we think about that? Is that going to work out? Is he now going to be a Hall of Fame tight end in the NFL?
I'm not quite ready to call him Antonio Gates just yet. He is certainly a physical specimen and very athletic. I think we saw that on the basketball court. But I think I heard he hadn't played football since like 9th grade. So pretty crazy that you can leave a sport in the 9th grade and then all of a sudden get done with college and get a tryout with the NFL. That's pretty wild. So, and I think Eric Musselman will tell you he hits hard, as his rotator cuff would indicate.
Alex, do you have any opinion on that? I don't really know how to feel about it because, as Hutch mentioned, he hasn't played football since 9th grade, so I haven't seen him on the field. But he's a big dude. He could probably, if he catches a pass, he's going to be hard to take down. What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, growing up, Peyton Manning was my favorite athlete. In his 2013 Denver season, probably doesn't go down the same way it did without Julius Thomas, who notably by the broadcast 10 times a game, every single game, did play basketball in college and didn't play football. So I think, you're in for one of those situations where it's either going to work or it's not. I'm not expecting, like Hutch said, for him to be Antonio Gates and for him to be a Hall of Famer. But when you play basketball and you are that size, you do have certain kind of tangible aspects to you that do help you play tight end. So if he can catch and get the plays down and be physical and block, then sure, there's a chance this could work. I'm not banking on it, like you said, but I don't see why this wouldn't be worth a shot for an NFL team to check out.
All right. Well, up next on the HawgBeat Hour, Andrew Hutchinson is going to do his Know the Foe segment. And then after that, we'll talk baseball ourselves, kind of look at Arkansas's postseason. Hutch, you had a really interesting article about Arkansas in the postseason. So we'll talk about that a little bit and get you set for the Auburn series this weekend.
You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas on HitThatLine.com. Now, here's your host, Mason Choate.
Welcome back to another edition of HawgBeat's Know the Foe series. It's been a while, but with the SEC West race heating up, I figured it was a good time to get back into it. I'm Andrew Hutchinson, the managing editor of HawgBeat.com, the Arkansas site in the Rivals Network. And I'm excited to be joined today by one of my colleagues at Rivals, Brian Matthews, who is the senior editor over at AuburnSports.com. Brian, appreciate you taking the time to talk to us ahead of this week's big series. How are you?
I'm doing great, Andrew. Great to talk a little college baseball. One of my favorite times of the year. I've been covering Auburn and college baseball for over 20 years now. So looking forward to another great matchup this weekend.
Now, before we look ahead to that series, I want to kind of look back at the season Auburn has had. What kind of were the expectations, both within the program and kind of among the fan base going into the season? And is it safe to say that they have exceeded those expectations?
Yeah, I think they've overachieved this year. I know they're picked near the bottom in the preseason poll in the SEC. I think fans expected it to be an average type year. I don't think there was a whole lot of excitement in the preseason about the team. There's just a lot of questions. Lost so many players off of last year's team, but they have definitely overachieved. They've won a bunch of really close games. They have played some good teams really, really well, and then they've done a great job of taking care of business during the midweek games, which has really helped their RPI. I think when I checked 2 days ago, the RPI was up to 3. So that puts them in really good position when it comes to trying to host a regional, which they haven't done in quite a while. So it's been a really good season for Auburn, and they've definitely exceeded all expectations so far.
Now, this past weekend, they lost the series, but it was against Tennessee, which no shame in that. But they did take a game, which is more than most teams can say, and they were right there in the other two. Kind of what's the mood around the program after dropping a series like that?
Yeah, they were up 4-2 on Friday night, and then Tennessee scored 15 runs the last 2 innings. They lost 17-4. I think that's what it was. And then Sunday's game was 3-3 going to the 8th, and then Tennessee hit a 2-run home run there to win it. So yes, very competitive series. I don't know if you saw it, but Tennessee's coach, who's had some run-ins before, took exception to the bat flip. I guess it was Saturday, Auburn's walk-off, well, not walk-off, but winning home run. There were 3-run home run, I think it was the 8th or 9th. And he tossed the bat back toward Auburn's dugout and toward all the players out there celebrating. So that almost kicked off a little brawl there, which would have been interesting. But I would say Auburn's going to come into the series with a lot of confidence, right? They feel like they can play with anybody and compete. They do have some injuries that have affected this team. That happened Friday night against Tennessee. They lost Hayden Mullins, their Friday night starter. Don't have official word yet, but we think it's going to be for the season, most likely Tommy John. And then Blake Burkhalter, who leads the SEC in saves, he tweaked his hamstring. I think he's going to be okay to pitch this weekend, but we have not got confirmation on that either. So that's one just to keep an eye on.
Gotcha. And of course, Arkansas fans are very well aware of Tony Vitello as a former assistant here. Yes. And they had a run-in with Dave Van Horn last year. So
they're not buddies anymore, are they?
Yeah, that's kind of their style over there in Knoxville. Yeah. It's interesting. But back to Auburn, the Tigers are led by arguably the Golden Spikes front runner, in my opinion, and Sonny DeShara. He's putting up just incredible numbers right now, hitting 436, 13 home runs, 40 RBIs. He's drawing lots of walks and not striking out very much. He was a good player at Sanford,
Yes.
but this is the SEC, and he's putting up even better numbers here. Did this come out of nowhere, or what can you kind of tell us about his evolution there at Auburn?
Well, he did put up the big numbers at Sanford, but you didn't know how that would adjust to the SEC. You're right. But and if you look at him, he's just a big old boy. You know, he's 100% Italian, right? In fact, if any Arkansas fans come down, you'll hear his walk-up song. I don't know the name of it, but it's like the Italian wedding song, and it just gets the whole crowd just really fired up. And he has really, really quick hands, so it's just hard to get one by him, especially when he's dialed in. The one issue with him lately is teams are just, pitching around him or intentionally walking him a lot, and he's usually pretty patient, although he has struck out a little bit more lately. Auburn's been working to try to get somebody, behind him in the order that's a little bit more dangerous. And, they may have found that guy and Bobby, who hit that 3-run home run, against Tennessee Saturday to win it. But he's a special player, hits power, hits a lot of balls for doubles. Normally is center field to a left field type hitter, but can go the oppo at times.
Now, I mean, it seems like Auburn has a pretty solid lineup overall.
Yeah.
Kind of what's their style, and who are some other guys, aside from Deshara, that Arkansas fans should be aware of?
Blake Rambush is a high quality leadoff guy. He's a guy that, when Auburn plays leadoff guys like him, you hate to see it, because first of all, he's going to get in there and make that pitcher work for it. And second of all, he just finds ways to get on base. And when he gets on base, he's one of those guys that he takes a lot of attention away from the pitcher and what he's trying to do to the hitter. So he's just one of those guys. I think he's reached base going back to his last year of junior college. It's some crazy stat like 58 of 60 times or something like that. So he is a guy who gets on base. He's also got some pop. He can get a home run or drive it into the gaps pretty well. So he's a guy that you're going to want to keep an eye on top of the order. And then Auburn has got a bunch of guys just through the order that a little bit of pop here and there, but they're pretty competitive. They do a good job of getting pitches into starters and getting the bullpens and having success against bullpen pitchers. That's been their MO a lot of times. If they can keep it close, get into the late innings, they've usually got a good chance to win. And they've got a bunch of clutch guys down in the order. Bobby Moore's a senior. His dad played at Auburn. Brandon Moore, Brody's a great defensive shortstop and come up with some big clutch hits. I would say this team plays very good defensively. One of the better defensive teams I've seen at Auburn. I think they're second or third in fielding percentage, at least they were last time I checked. And then, pitching wise, they don't have that number one lockdown starter, the guy that's going to be a flamethrower and, hit the big slider, that a lot of guys have in the SEC. But their best pitcher, Joseph Gonzalez, who they had been using on Sunday, is a guy who just has a sinker that once he gets that going, teams just roll through that order really fast. And before you know it, it's 2 hours and you're in the eighth inning. He's one of those type of pitchers. And he almost did that to Tennessee. He gave up 3 runs in the first, held them without a hit, I think, or maybe a couple of hits through the next 6 innings, and then gave up that bomb there in the 8th.
And speaking of that rotation, I mean, you mentioned the injury to Mullins. You don't expect him to pitch this weekend. How do you, if he's not available, how do they shuffle up the rotation, and who do you think Arkansas will see as the starters this weekend?
They got some options. My guess is it's going to be Mason Barnett, who has served as their midweek pitcher for most of the season. He started in the SEC a lot last year, very inconsistent, has probably the best stuff on Auburn's staff, but maybe doesn't have that lockdown tough mentality, right? He's a guy that in the past, he's gotten better, obviously, but in the past, when he's gotten in trouble, it tends to get amplified. He has a tough time, fighting through that. So, but the first time through the order, he can be really, really good. So we'll see if he gets the opportunity, and if he does, and if he's on, he could do some good things for Auburn. But that's been sort of like Auburn this year. They've had guys step up when guys have been down. They've had guys overachieve from what you expect. So maybe Mason Barnett is a guy who can do that now.
And also, I want to get your quick thoughts on maybe the bullpen. You mentioned the closers dealing with a little bit of an injury. Who are some of the key arms that come out of the bullpen? And Arkansas fans, their biggest concern is, are there any lefties that can come in and give Arkansas problems? Because that's something Arkansas has struggled with this year.
Well, Auburn doesn't have a bunch of lefties, but they got a really good one, Carson Skipper. He's been used as a setup guy. And if you go back to Auburn's sweep over, who was it 2 weeks ago? I can't remember. But Carson Skipper and Blake Burkhalter pitched in all 3 games. Skipper set up Burkhalter. Burkhalter got 3 saves, so they will use him. He's a guy that can go, for a short outing or maybe give you 2 or 3 innings if you need him to. He's not perfect, not blow guys away type, but when he's on, he can be really good and durable. They've got a couple other guys, Tommy Sheehan, a transfer from Notre Dame, who they thought might come in and be a Friday night type starter. He's taken a while to get started. He's another option possibly to start in Mullen's place, but he's a guy now that's been lately coming in and giving Auburn 1 or 2 innings of relief. I think he did that against Tennessee for an inning, if I'm not mistaken, and did okay there. So he's another lefty to watch out for. But Auburn's bullpen has been really, really thin. I would say that Skipper and Burkhalter probably been a little overworked this season, and they've been trying to develop some other guys behind them. So we'll see how that keeps on going. They've got 3 or 4 other guys they've been working in there trying to get to step up, and we'll see if those guys can take another step forward this weekend.
And I know whenever we think about, the top SEC environments, you don't necessarily always think about Auburn baseball, but I'm curious kind of what the excitement level is and kind of what you expect from the atmosphere for a really big time series this weekend down there in Auburn.
I don't think, Jordan Hare is a great atmosphere, right? And Auburn Arena has become maybe the best atmosphere in the SEC, or one of the best. I don't want to make anybody mad or anything, but it just hasn't happened at Plainsman Park yet. The one thing that is happening is they're starting to fill up the park, right? About a month ago, they had the largest attendance for a midweek game, and they've been, filling it up on weekend games, although finals are this week, so students are going to be moving out here soon. So we'll see how that affects the attendance. But I would never call Plainsman Park a really tough place to play. It's a beautiful park, it's an enjoyable place to go. But I don't consider it really a tough place for opponents. The toughest thing about Plainsman Park is just playing Auburn, I guess, right now.
And you're welcome to make a prediction here if you want. You don't have to, but I'm curious, kind of just lastly, how are you feeling about this series? Kind of how do you think this series is going to play out?
I haven't really thought about it. I would not be surprised to see Arkansas take 2 or 3. But then again, this is an Auburn team, right? Because on paper, Arkansas is a better team, right? And they should win 2 out of 3, even if it's on the road. But this is an Auburn team that somehow keeps finding ways to come up with wins. I would expect a very competitive series, and for most of the 3 games to be decided late innings. So that's the thing I expect. I'd probably pick Arkansas to take 2 or 3, but would not be surprised at all to see Auburn win the series, probably coming down to Sunday.
Well, that's all I got for you, Brian. Again, thanks for taking some time to talk to us and give us some insight on the Tigers, a very surprising team in the SEC. I know I'm really looking forward to watching what should be a great series. As a reminder to everyone listening, the series starts at 7 o'clock Friday with 4:30 and 1 o'clock starts on Saturday and Sunday. Games 1 and 3 are on the Plus, SEC Plus, if you want to stream it. But Game 2 is actually on the SEC Network. And as always, you can get complete coverage of the Diamond Hogs and all other sports over at HawgBeat.com.
You're listening to the HawgBeat Hour with Andrew Hutchinson, Alex Trader, and Mason Choate on ESPN Arkansas and HitThatLine.com. Now, here's your host, Mason Choate.
All right, we're back here on the HawgBeat Hour. Andrew Hutchinson and Mason Choate with you. Good stuff from Brian Matthews. Very thankful that he joined us from AuburnSports.com. And now we're going to talk about Arkansas Auburn. But before we do, I want to mention, if you want some more Razorback baseball content, you don't get enough on the HawgBeat Hour, you don't get enough at HawgBeat.com, go listen to the Diamond Hogs podcast. That is with myself and Robert Stewart. This week's episode, we had Kendall Diggs and Coach Kevin Bohannon on. And so it's a great listen, good stuff from both of them. And then we talk about the Hogs ourselves as well. Hutch, Arkansas loses to Missouri State on Tuesday, had 2 hits going in to the 9th inning on the whole evening, and one of those was a home run from Dylan Leach. So I think Robert and I both agreed that it's not really much to be concerned about that Arkansas lost to Missouri State. I'm curious what you think. Are you concerned, or is it just one of those things where it's like it's a midweek? Missouri State had been good against Power 5 teams and they just wanted it more. How do you feel?
I think the fact that they lost, just the loss itself, is not necessarily concerning because a midweek loss happens every now and then. I mean, if Arkansas had won that game, it would have been the first year since I believe 2005 that they made it through an entire season without a midweek loss. So that kind of tells you the midweek losses happen. I think the fact that it happened the way it did is what's concerning because it's one thing if you go out there and your pitching just implodes because you're not going to throw Connor Noland or Hagen Smith out there or even like Brady Tigert. You're not going to use your dudes, and so that's one thing if the other team hits, especially a team like Missouri State that's very offensive, got a really good lineup. The fact that Arkansas couldn't put up anything offensively against a bad pitching team is something I think worth, being concerned about, in my opinion, because that's something we've seen several times. I mean, just last week against UCA, they couldn't score. I mean, they scored 2 runs in 10 innings, and the walk-off run came on a wild pitch. So that kind of shows you that the offensive struggles have been there before. I mean, Arkansas has played 22 straight midweek innings without back-to-back hits. That should not happen when you're playing teams like UCA and Missouri State that are team ERAs over 5. You should be hitting these teams just like you were hitting, Grambling and UAPB earlier. Obviously, these teams are better than those, but maybe instead of scoring 20 runs, you should be scoring, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 runs against these teams. I don't think that's crazy to think. So that aspect of it was concerning, and I think it's very valid when Arkansas fans bring that up they're a little bit worried because the offense is yet to live up to the expectations, and here we are with 3 weeks left, and you're starting to wonder, like, is this just the team that it is, or are they capable of getting hot? I think they are, but as every game passes, I'm like, man, when's it gonna happen?
Yeah, as I mentioned, we talked to Kendall Diggs on the Diamond Hogs podcast, and he said that he still doesn't think this team has hit their full potential yet. He thinks that they have another level in them, and when that's going to come, I don't know. This week against Auburn would be ideal because that's the biggest series of the season so far. But that's to be seen. But as far as this Missouri State game goes, I want to ask one more question because I don't want to stay on a midweek for super long. But actually, 2 questions. I'm sorry. First question: are you're going to feel different about it if Arkansas doesn't go and score 3 runs in the bottom of the ninth? If they go 3 up, 3 down in the bottom of the ninth, then you're like, oh my goodness, this was terrible, right?
Well, I mean, you also got to look at the fact that Missouri State scored 3 in the top of the ninth, and that was against your pitchers that you're probably not going to see very much on the weekends. I think they threw Nick Griffin out there, who's still coming back from Tommy John, some guys like that. Because I mean, the guys that you think could be contributors in critical situations, Will McIntyre, uh, Cole Ramage, Zebulon Vermillion, those guys, and Zach Morris, those guys had only given up 3 runs against a very good offensive team. And so to me, that aspect really, the fact that Arkansas scored 3 runs in the bottom of the ninth to make it, closer, I don't think it made it just kind of what the game felt like the entire night, which was a close, tight game in which Arkansas couldn't get the big hit. So I don't necessarily think the fact that they scored 3 in the bottom of the ninth really changed my perception of the game that much, just because Missouri State did that in the top half of the inning.
Well, I was just saying from like the perspective of Arkansas had 2 hits going into the bottom of the ninth. If they go 3 up, 3 down, they end the game with 2 hits, one of them being a home run from Leach, and you're thinking this is just terrible. Whereas in the bottom of the ninth, they did put together some hits, they scored some more runs, and you left the game feeling, well, at least they made it interesting. At least they were able to get some hits there in the bottom of the ninth. But I'm also curious why. I know it's a midweek, but I don't know. I feel weird about Toll and Griffin coming in the top of the ninth and giving up those runs when it was a winnable game. But also they were down. It was just a weird situation and they lost the game. That's just how I feel.
Yeah, I mean, you're not going to use Brady Tigert. You're not going to use Evan Taylor in those situations. I mean, I think Evan Taylor maybe did pitch last week against UCA, but I mean, he pitched multiple times this weekend. I think maybe in all 3 games. I'm not 100% sure on that. But you're not going to use your dudes. And I mean, you get to the 9th inning, you've given up 3 runs. Your offense has scored 1, 2 hits, as you mentioned. I mean, I was okay with it because those are also still guys that you think maybe could potentially still help you at some point. You know, Heston Toll showed flashes last year and had been pitching better of late this year. So I didn't necessarily hate it. And I think Nick Griffin, I mean, Dave Van Horn mentioned it at the Swatters Club earlier this week as well. Like, this is a guy they think can be really, really good for them. He's still just, 15, 16 months removed from Tommy John. And as we've seen with, Cody Scroggins comes to mind, like his first year back from Tommy John, he was not particularly very good. And then he was much better the next year. So it's one of those things where they're trying to, this was their last chance, last non-conference game to get those guys out there in a, quote unquote meaningless game. And so I don't necessarily hate the decision.
Okay, so looking forward now, Arkansas plays Auburn, which is lining up to be a big series as far as postseason projections go. You kind of wrote a story about it. Basically, Arkansas really needs to win this series, and I think going into the year and really up until this week, it never felt like this Auburn series was going to mean a whole lot, but now it's the most meaningful series of the season. If Auburn wins, they're first in the SEC West, and then Arkansas is sitting there, and they don't have a tiebreaker against A&M or Auburn. And so I think it's tough. What do you think about this series? And I mean, you kind of wrote a story about it over at HawgBeat.com. Go check it out. But this is going to be big towards Arkansas's postseason.
Yeah, and I mean Auburn would have to sweep this weekend in order to overtake, first place. If they just win 2 out of 3, Arkansas would still have a 1-game lead. But as you mentioned, they would not have the tiebreaker with Auburn or A&M, and that would be that's critical because it could end up being a tie. Think back to 2018 and 2019 when Arkansas won the West. Well, they technically shared the title both years, and I think one year they had won the series against the team they had shared it with, and the other year they didn't. So it's going to come down to the very end. So it is a critical series, just also from the RPI standpoint. We could talk about if the RPI is a good metric or not, but historically speaking, it is a very good indicator on where teams end up as seeding wise. I mean, I think over the last 4 years, only one team outside of the top 10 RPI was given a top 8 national seed. And Arkansas currently is at 29. They've got a lot of work to do. Luckily, Auburn, I think they're number 4 in the RPI. So if you can win that series on the road, that's going to be a really nice RPI boost. Vanderbilt, even though they've struggled, is still a top 15 RPI team. You win that series, that's going to be a nice RPI boost. And even Alabama, they're not great. Their RPI is a lot lower, but it's on the road and another opportunity. And then you got the SEC tournament. So you've got some opportunities. It's just a matter of can you take advantage of them? And I think this Auburn series is huge. I think if you win the West, even if Arkansas's RPI is like, still only around 15 or so, I would be dumbfounded if they don't give them a top 8 national seed just because of the SEC West reputation. It's almost like, and plus Arkansas's reputation, and you always expect, oh well, it's Kentucky, they're going to get a boost from the NCAA tournament, or oh, it's Alabama, so of course they're going to get the benefit of the doubt from the College Football Playoff Committee. You might get a little bit of benefit from that whenever it comes to the baseball tournament because Arkansas has been so good recently, even if the RPI isn't there like it usually is. So definitely something to keep an eye on is that RPI ranking, how it moves over these last 3 weeks. Because honestly, if they don't take care of business, they may find themselves not even hosting a regional, which is just crazy to think about. But after looking at the numbers last night or yesterday, it's very much a possibility.
Yeah, that would be crazy if Arkansas doesn't host a regional. And I think I've been saying all week that if Auburn wins 2 out of 3, they then have first place in the West. So if you heard me say that, I'm sorry, I was wrong. So I just want to talk a little bit. We only have a few minutes here, but I want to talk a little bit about this lineup and just like what Dave Van Horn has said it. They haven't really had 5 or 6 guys in a game or on a weekend just have a good game or weekend. And I feel like you look at it, Robert Moore, where's Robert Moore at? I mean, he was hitting 225 going into his last at bat against Missouri State. And then he lines it into left and gets a hit, but he's only hitting 230 on the year. What do you think that's attributed to?
It's hard to say. I mean, he's had some bad luck. I mean, I think he had a line out to the first baseman against Missouri State. He's had a couple of I know there was one against Ole Miss last weekend where he absolutely crushed the ball, but the wind was blowing in 20 miles an hour and it didn't go out. So he's had some bad luck. So he probably shouldn't be hitting 230, but also he's probably a guy that should, maybe be hitting 280, just based on talent. Because look at his history. He's struggled against SEC pitching, and that's I think with all of last year and most of this year, on his resume, I think that's just the facts. He's a tremendous defensive second baseman. He has made some just incredible defensive plays, but offensively, he's got a lot of pop, a lot of power, but he's not necessarily a guy that's going to hit for a high average. I think that's just kind of the facts of it. He's still drawing a lot of walks. He's not striking out a ton, so he's still a good player. We just haven't really seen him get some good luck, and also I just don't think he's a high average kind of guy.
All right. Well, Hutch, we don't have a lot more time here, so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. But this weekend, the Hogs and Auburn, big series. As we mentioned, a lot on the line. Don't get it twisted. If Auburn has to sweep Arkansas to have first place in the SEC West. So if you heard me, I was wrong. I'm stupid. I'm sorry. But Friday, 7:00, SEC Network Plus. Saturday, it's going to be on SEC Network, national television, 4:30, and then Sunday at 1:00, Hogs and Auburn. Big series. Hutch, you got a prediction real quick?
I'm leaning toward maybe Arkansas breaking out and having a really big series win this weekend because they really need it. So I'm going to lean that, but it would not shock me if they lose the series.
So 2 out of 3 or sweep or what?
A road sweep against a really good team, I would be shocked.
Okay. Well, there you go. There's Andrew Hutchinson's prediction, and it is guaranteed. So go check out the Hogs this weekend, and thank you for listening to the HawgBeat Hour.